The baby screams filled first class like a siren that no one could shut off. Every passenger on the Los Angeles to Chicago flight heard it. The businessman in 3A presses noise-canceling headphones tighter against the skull. The older couple in row 2 exchanged glances heavy with judgment. A flight attendant hovered near the galley, wringing her hands, wanting to help but radiating the unmistakable energy of someone who had already been told no. But no one moved toward the source. No one dared, not when they saw the man holding the child. Jae-sung Kwon sat in seat 1, and like a king on a throne he despised. He was 36 years old, broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, with cheekbones that belonged on magazine covers, and eyes so dark they absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Traditional Korean tattoos, dragons and phoenixes rendered in black ink, crawled up the left side of his neck from beneath a crisp white collar. His charcoal suit was custom-tailored. His watch cost more than most people's cars, and the 2 men seated behind him, stone-faced, earpieces visible, hands resting near their jacket openings, were clearly not traveling companions. He was the kind of man people instinctively moved away from, the kind of man airport security waved through because someone had made a phone call, the kind of man whose name appeared in no public database, but whose word could rearrange the economy of an entire coastline. And right now, the most feared man in the Korean-American underground was losing a battle with a 3-month-old baby. Seo-jun Kwon weighed barely 11 pounds. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's delicate chin and a set of lungs that could shatter crystal. His tiny fist flailed against Jae-sun's chest with surprising fury, his face flushed crimson, his mouth open in a wail that had been going on for 45 minutes and showed no signs of stopping. 3 months old. 3 months since Yuna had taken her last breath, bringing this child into the world. 3 months since hemorrhaging on the delivery table, while doctors fought and failed and Jae-sun stood helpless behind a glass partition, watching the woman he loved bleed out while his son took his first breath. 3 months since the most powerful man on the West Coast learned what true helplessness felt like. He had tried everything. The bottle, prepared with the exact formula the pediatrician recommended, sat rejected in the seat pocket, its nipple untouched. The pacifier had been spat out 3 times. Rocking, bouncing, whispering Korean, English, desperate combinations of both. Nothing worked. Seo-jun did not want formula. He did not want rubber and silicone. He wanted something primal, something warm, something that smelled like safety and sounded like a heartbeat against his ear. He wanted his mother, and his mother was gone. "Sir," one of Jae-sun's men leaned forward carefully, voice barely above a whisper. "We could request an emergency landing. I can make the call." "No." Jae-sun's voice was silk over steel. "We stay on schedule." But the schedule didn't matter to Seo-jun. Power didn't matter. Territory, operations, the fact that entire organizations trembled at the Kwon name, none of it mattered to an infant who simply needed to eat and couldn't understand why the world had become so cold. For rows back, Kalina Du Bois closed her eyes and tried to breathe. She was 32 years old, with deep brown skin, natural curls pulled into a low bun, and hands that hadn't stopped trembling since the crying started. She wore a simple navy blouse and jeans, nothing that announced wealth or status, and the dark circles under her eyes told a story she hadn't shared with anyone on this flight. She was a pediatric nurse. Or she had been, before the night 9 months ago when she placed her daughter Amara in her crib, kissed her forehead, whispered, "Good night, sweet girl," and woke 4 hours later to silence. The terrible, unnatural silence of a nursery that should have held breathing and didn't. Sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, for letters that demolished a life. The doctors had said it gently, as if gentleness could soften the fact that Kalina's 6-month-old daughter had simply stopped living in the night. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. Kalina had not returned to the NICU since. She couldn't. Watching other people's babies thrive while hers lay in a cemetery in Inglewood had broken something inside her that grief counseling was only beginning to reassemble. She was flying home from a wellness retreat in Los Angeles. Her therapist's suggestion, trying to convince herself that healing was possible. And then the crying started. Her body responded before her mind could intervene. Her breasts ached with the familiar pressure of letdown, milk rising in response to an infant's distress. 9 months after Amara's death, her body still produced milk, still waited for a baby that would never come. The lactation consultant had called it persistent lactation linked to unresolved grief. Kalina called her body, refusing to accept what her mind already knew. She gripped the armrest and tried to block out the sound, but every wail was a hook in her chest, pulling her toward the front of the cabin with a force she couldn't explain. "Miss, are you all right?" A flight attendant paused beside her, brow creased with concern. Kalina looked up, then toward the sound. "That baby! He sounds hungry. Really hungry. I'm a pediatric nurse. Maybe I can help." The attendant's expression shifted between relief and uncertainty. "The passenger has been quite firm about refusing assistance, but if you'd like to try—" Kalina was unbuckling her seatbelt before the sentence ended. Walking those 4 rows felt like crossing a canyon. With each step, the crying grew louder and her heart pounded harder. She could see the bodyguards now, their eyes tracking her approach with a flat assessment of men trained to evaluate threats. She could see the other passengers deliberately looking away, giving the powerful man a wide berth. And then she saw Jason. Up close, he was overwhelming. Not just his size or his presence, but the raw tension radiating off him like heat from a furnace. His jaw was locked so tight she could see the muscles straining. His eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, held something she recognized instantly because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. Grief, the wild, unprocessed grief of someone holding on by their fingertips. And the baby. Seo Jun was so small against that broad chest. His face was scrunched in misery, his cries hoarse now, weaker, the desperate sound of an infant running out of energy but not out of need. The flight attendant cleared her throat. "Sir, this passenger's a nurse." She wondered if she might. Jason's gaze snapped to Kalina, and she felt the impact like a physical blow. Those eyes could strip pretense from bone, could make a person forget every word they'd ever learned. For a moment, Kalina forgot how to breathe. "A nurse," he repeated. His voice was low, rough, with Korean inflections softened by years in America. "Pediatric." Kalina heard herself say, "I know that cry. He's hungry, really hungry. I've tried the bottle." Frustration cracked through his controlled exterior. "He won't take it." Kalina stepped closer, her nurse's instincts overriding survival, alarm blaring in her head. Some babies won't accept artificial nipples, especially if they were breastfed initially. Was his mother? Something shifted in Jason's expression. A flash of pain so raw that Kalina caught her breath. "She died," he said flatly. 3 months ago, giving birth to him. The first-class cabin seemed to go silent around them. Kalina's eyes burned with tears. She refused to shed in front of a stranger, her grief recognizing his. 2 people standing in the wreckage of loss, connected by the sound of a baby who needed something neither of them could provide alone. "Then he's probably refusing the bottle because he's searching for something familiar," she said softly. "Something he associates with comfort and safety." Their eyes locked. Kalina saw the exact moment. He understood what she was offering. His jaw tightened, and for a long second, she thought he would send her away. Then Seo Jun let out another desperate wail, and something in the untouchable Mafia boss crumbled. "You're offering what I think you're offering?" His voice was quiet. "Testing." Kalina swallowed hard. This was insane. This was beyond anything she had ever imagined doing. But this baby was suffering, and her body was producing milk that had nowhere to go, and maybe she could help this tiny life even though she had failed to save her own. "I lost my daughter 9 months ago," she admitted. "My body hasn't stopped producing. If you'd allow me, if he'll accept, I can try to help him." The silence between them was enormous. Every passenger in earshot had gone still, sensing something profound even if they couldn't name it. Jae-sun looked at his screaming son, then at this stranger, this woman who had just offered the most intimate kindness one human being could give another without wanting a single thing in return. "The galley," he said, standing with fluid grace. "It's more private. The attendant can set up a space." The flight attendant moved quickly, creating a small private area in the first-class galley with blankets for modesty. Jae-sun stood outside the curtain, his bodyguard wisely maintaining distance. Inside, Kalina settled Seo-jun against her. The baby whimpered, turning his face toward her, searching. His instincts knew what to do even if the rest of the world had forgotten. When he latched on and began to nurse, tears streamed silently down Kalina's face. He wasn't a Mara. He would never be a Mara. But he was a child who needed comfort, who needed nourishment, who needed the one thing her body was still desperate to provide. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, stroking his dark hair. "I've got you." 15 minutes later, Kalina emerged with Seo-jun sleeping peacefully in her arms. His tiny fist curled against her chest, his face relaxed into boneless contentment of a well-fed infant. Jae-sun looked at his son, truly peaceful for the first time since Yuna's death, and felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Something that, in his world, could rearrange everything. "He's asleep," Kalina said softly, moving to hand the baby back. "He ate well. He should sleep for a few hours." Jae-sun's hand reached out, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with surprising gentleness, not restraining, requesting. "Your name," he said. The command in his voice had softened to something closer to reverence. "Kalina. Kalina Du Bois." Jae-sun Kwan. He took Seo-jun from her arms with practiced care. The baby didn't stir. "I owe you a debt, Kalina Du Bois." "You don't owe me anything. I was happy to help." He studied her for a long moment. This woman who had walked toward danger instead of away from it, who had offered a piece of herself to a stranger's child, who had turned his son's desperate cries into peaceful silence. "Call me when we land," he said, producing a card from his suit pocket. "I want to properly thank you." Kalina took the card. Their fingers brushed and something electric passed between them, a current that made her breath catch, and from the slight widening of his eyes, he felt it too. "That's not necessary," she said. "It is to me." His voice had gone quiet, dangerous in an entirely different way. "You gave my son something precious. The least I can do is take you to dinner." Kalina knew she should say no. Everything about this man, the bodyguards, the tattoos, the way other passengers avoided his gaze, told her to walk away. But there was something in his expression when he looked at his sleeping son, a vulnerability that called to her own shattered heart. "Dinner," she heard herself say. "Just dinner." A ghost of a smile touched Jae-sun's lips. "Just dinner." She returned to her seat in a daze, the warmth of Seo-jun's small body still imprinted on her skin. She didn't notice Jae-sun's bodyguards already pulling information on their phones. Didn't see the quiet intensity in Jae-sun's eyes as he watched her walk away. In the world of the Korean-American underground, where tradition ran deeper than blood, what had just happened at 30,000 feet was not simple. It wasn't just a kind stranger helping a child in need. In the old ways, the ways Jae-sun's grandfather had taught him, the ways that still govern the ancient families, a woman who nursed a boss's child became bound to that family, became sacred, became his. Kalina Du Bois had just fed his son. She'd given Seo-jun the one thing Jae-sun couldn't provide, the one thing he'd been desperate for since Yuna's death, and she had absolutely no idea what that meant. If this story already has you holding your breath, you need to subscribe to Echo True Stories right now. Hit that notification bell, because what happens next will change everything. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. The black SUV that picked Kalina up from her apartment in Chicago 2 days later was not what she had expected. She had imagined a restaurant. Maybe something upscale given Jae-sun's obvious wealth. A quiet corner booth, candlelight, polite conversation over wine. Instead, the driver, a mountain of a man with cold eyes and an earpiece, escorted her into a vehicle with windows tinted so dark she couldn't see out. The locks engaged with a decisive click. "Where are we going?" She kept her voice steady. "The Kwan estate, ma'am." The driver's eyes met hers in the rear-view mirror. "Mr. Kwan thought you'd be more comfortable with a private dinner. Given the baby." Kalina noticed the formality. Not Jae-sun. Not a first name's casual warmth. The careful distance of a man referring to someone important. Someone to be handled with precision. The SUV left the city and wound through suburbs that grew progressively more affluent until they reached an area where estates hid behind stone walls and iron gates. When they turned through a particular gate, this one monitored by security cameras and flanked by two men who were clearly not gardeners, Kalina felt her heart climb into her throat. The Kwan estate was stunning. Traditional Korean architecture merged with modern luxury. Curved tile roofs met walls of glass, manicured gardens stretched in every direction, and koi ponds caught the last light of evening like scattered coins. It was beautiful. It was also, unmistakably, a fortress. Miss Du Bois, a woman in her 60s, appeared at the door. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a neat bun. Her posture was immaculate, and her expression as she took in Kalina's appearance, the natural curls, the brown skin, everything that marked her as an outsider, was carefully controlled but not warm. "I'm Hannah, house manager. Mr. Kwan is waiting in the nursery. If you'll follow me." Kalina caught the way Hannah's eyes lingered on her, assessing. The message was subtle but clear. "You are being measured." Hannah led her through a home that belonged to a design magazine. Marble floors with traditional Korean inlay patterns. Priceless art. Ancient scrolls beside contemporary pieces. Furniture that whispered wealth and a voice too refined to shout. Everything spoke of power, legacy, and a world Kalina had no map for. They climbed the grand staircase, and Kalina heard it before she saw anything. Seo Jun's cries. Not as desperate as on the plane, but distressed and thin in a way that made her nurse's instincts fire. The nursery door opened onto a room that was both opulent and surprisingly tender. Soft blues and silvers. Hand-painted murals of Korean mountain landscapes across one wall. A mobile of paper cranes hanging above the crib. And Jae-sun, standing by the window with Seo Jun wailing his arms, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, forearms corded with muscle and marked with extensive traditional tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. He looked exhausted, not the performative exhaustion of a busy man, but the bone-deep depletion of a father who was running out of answers. Kalina, her name in his mouth, sounded like relief. Thank God, he's been crying for hours. She crossed the room without thinking, her hands already reaching for the baby. The moment Seo Jun was in her arms, his cries diminished to whimpers. He turned his face against her chest, rooting instinctively, and Kalina felt her heart crack open all over again. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're so hungry, aren't you?" She looked at Jae-sun. He's thinner than he was on the plane. What happened? He won't eat. Jae-sun ran a hand through his hair, the gesture making him look younger, more human. Not the bottle, not anything. He took one feeding the night we landed and nothing since. The pediatrician wants to hospitalize him, a feeding tube. But I can't do that to him. He's already lost his mother. I can't. His voice fractured. Kalina looked at the baby in her arms. This small, starving child who had imprinted on her in a single feeding and now refused every substitute. And then at the father, this terrifying, powerful man, who was also just a person drowning in grief and desperation. "This is insane," she said quietly. "I know. I barely know you. You're clearly involved in something dangerous." "Yes." "I should walk out that door." "Probably. But he needs to eat." Jae-sun said nothing. He didn't need to. The answer was crying in her arms. Kalina fed Seo Jun in privacy, while Jae-sun waited outside. When she emerged with the baby sleeping peacefully against her chest, Jae-sun's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping inches, his jaw unclenching for the first time. "I try to hire wet nurses," he said, leading her to a sitting room adjacent to the nursery. "Professional services. They all refused once they learned who I was. No one wants involvement with my family." He met her eyes. "But you offer without knowing, without wanting anything. What exactly is your family, Jae-sun?" He poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. She watched his hands, steady, precise, deliberate. "I run the Kwan family. We control most of the Korean-American operations from here to San Francisco. Some legitimate, some less so." He set the glass down. "I'm telling you this because you deserve the truth before I ask what I'm about to ask." Kalina's stomach tightened. "Ask." "Stay. 1 week. Help me transition Seo Jun to bottles. Work with a lactation consultant. Try different approaches. After that, I'll have a contract drawn up. legally binding. You leave with full compensation, no strings, no retaliation. No one follows you. My word. Your word, Kalina repeated. You just told me you run a criminal organization. I did. And I'm also a father whose son is starving. His jaw locked. You're the only person who can help him. Kalina looked at Seo Jun sleeping in the portable bassinet Jae-sun had wheeled in. The baby looked fragile, too thin, dark circles shadowing eyes that should have been bright with health. She thought of Amara, of how she would have moved mountains to keep her daughter alive. 1 week, she said, and I want that contract within the hour. In writing. Signed. Witness. Done. An hour later, Kalina sat in Jae-sun's study reading pages of legal language that confirmed she was free to leave after 7 days. She signed with steady hands. As the lawyer departed, Hannah appeared with tea. The older woman's severity had softened slightly, replaced by something closer to cautious respect. You should know what you're stepping into, Hannah said, pouring with practiced grace. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was different. Personal. My father was Korean. My mother was Black American. I came into this household 40 years ago, and the old families treated me like a disease. Kalina looked up sharply. Hannah's features, now that she was looking, held the unmistakable blend of dual heritage. Elegant Korean bone structure, warmer skin than most of the household staff, eyes that held stories from both worlds. Why are you telling me this? Because I see how Mr. Kwan looks at you, like your salvation. Hannah's gaze was steady. But you're not Korean. The old families won't accept this easily. You'll face prejudice, hostility, pressure. The question is whether you're strong enough. I'm only staying a week. Hannah smiled. Sad, knowing, and ancient. That's what I told myself. 40 years ago. That night, Kalina lay in the guest suite listening to Seo Jun's soft breathing through the monitor and told herself this was temporary. A job. A kindness. Nothing more. But over the following days, the lies became harder to maintain. She established a rhythm with Seo Jun. Feedings, nap schedules, tummy time on a blanket in the garden, while security watched from a respectful distance. The baby gained weight visibly, his cheeks filling out, his cries stronger and healthier. He began to track her voice across the room, his tiny face lighting up the moment she appeared. And Jae-sun was there for nearly every feeding. Not hovering, not commanding, just present. Sitting in the corner of a chair, watching his son nurse with an expression of wonder that tore Kalina apart. He started coming home earlier from wherever he went during the day, finding excuses to be in the kitchen while she prepared Seo Jun's evening routine, asking about her day with a genuine interest that dismantled her defenses. He remembered things. That she took her tea with honey, that she was allergic to shellfish, that she had once dreamed of opening a pediatric wellness center. He remembered because he listened. Not the way powerful men listened, cataloging information for leverage, but the way a person listens when every word matters. On the 4th night, after Seo Jun was asleep, Jae-sun found Kalina in the nursery. I want to show you something, he said, pulling out his phone. A soft melody filled the room, a Korean lullaby, haunting and beautiful. My mother sang this to me when I was small. I've been trying to sing it to Seo Jun, but his voice caught. I want him to know where he comes from. Teach me, Kalina whispered. Teach me the words. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise. Hope. Something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. For the next hour, he taught her the lullaby. Their voices blended in the dim nursery, his deep baritone guiding her through Korean syllables she stumbled over, his hand covering hers when frustration crept in. Like this, he murmured, singing the phrase again. He was so close she could feel his breath against her cheek. When Seo Jun stirred, Kalina sang the lullaby in her imperfect Korean, and Jae-sun's eyes filled with tears. Later, as they stood together over the crib, watching the baby sleep, Jae-sun spoke quietly. 3 families have already contacted me, making inquiries about you. About me? Why? In the old traditions, a woman who nurses a boss's child becomes sacred to that family. Some see it as a beautiful bond. Others, his jaw tightened, others see a black woman in that role as a threat to bloodline purity. The words landed like ice water. Am I in danger? Not while you're under my protection. His voice was absolute. No one touches you. No one comes near you. I give you my word on that. Kalina looked at this man, dangerous, powerful, tender with his son, and now fears for protectiveness over her, and felt the last wall around her heart begin to tremble. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself it was proximity. She told herself anything except the truth, because the truth was that her 1-week contract had been alive from the moment Seo-jun fell asleep in her arms, and she felt, for the first time in 9 months, like she had a reason to be alive. This story is just getting started, and the storm hasn't even hit yet. Drop a comment and tell us, would you have gotten in that SUV? Share this video with someone who needs a story about healing, and make sure you're part of the Echo True Stories family. You're going to need us for what comes next. The message arrived on the 6th day. Kalina found it tucked under the nursery door when she woke for Seo-jun's early feeding. A single photograph printed on glossy paper. It showed her arriving at the Kwan estate on her first night, stepping out of the black SUV in her navy blouse and jeans. Across the image, in red ink, someone had written 3 words. You don't belong here. Her hands went cold. She flipped the photo over. Nothing. No signature. No return address. Just hatred distilled into 3 words and a surveillance photo that proved someone had been watching. She did not scream. She did not cry. She placed the photograph face down on the dresser, fed Seo-jun with steady hands, and waited until he was sleeping peacefully before she went to find Jae-sun. He was in his study, on the phone, speaking rapid Korean in a voice she had never heard him use. Low, clipped, dangerous. When he saw her standing in the doorway holding the photograph, his conversation ended mid-sentence. Where did you find this? He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the photo from her hand. Under the nursery door. This morning. Something shifted in Jae-sun's face that Kalina had never seen before. Not the grief she had grown familiar with. Not the tenderness he showed his son. But a cold, contained fury that transformed his features into something primal. He made a single phone call. Within minutes, the head of a security team was in the study, and the estate went into lockdown. It's the Shin clan, the security chief confirmed an hour later. Shin Dae-ho has been running his mouth to every family on the West Coast. He's leaked Miss Du Bois's identity, her photos, the fact that she's been staying here in a nursing role. He's framing it as a corruption of sacred tradition. Kalina stood by the window, arms crossed, listening to men discuss her life like a chess problem. What does he want? She asked. Jae-sun and his security chief exchanged a glance. Shin Dae-ho lost significant territory to my family 10 years ago, Jae-sun said carefully. He's been waiting for leverage ever since. He's using you. Using the fact that I brought a non-Korean woman into a sacred role to turn the traditional families against me. If enough of them side with him, the council could vote to strip my family standing. So I'm a political weapon. You're a person, Jae-sun said firmly, and you're under my protection. I'm also putting your entire family at risk by being here. The silence confirmed what she already knew. Over the following days, the pressure mounted. Hannah intercepted most of the threats. Letters from anonymous sources, messages delivered through intermediary families, whispered warnings from household staff who had connections to the old guard. The language was always the same. Outsider, corruption, pollution of the bloodline. Kalina bore it with a stillness that surprised even herself. She had survived the death of her daughter. She had survived 9 months of grief, so heavy it bent her spine. Racist threats from men she had never met were terrible, but they were not the worst things she had endured. What she could not bear was the thought of Seo-jun being caught in the crossfire. I need to leave, she told Jae-sun on the 7th evening, the last night of her contract. They were in the nursery, Seo-jun sleeping between them in his crib. The baby monitor casting soft green light across the room. My contract is up tomorrow. I should go before this gets worse. The threats won't stop because you leave. Dae-ho is using you as a symbol. Whether you're here or not, the damage to my standing is already done. Then what's the point of me staying? The point. Jae-sun stopped himself. He was standing by the window, the garden lights casting his face in half shadow, and Kalina could see him fighting something. wrestling with words that want to come out in one shape and kept rearranging themselves into another. "The point is that my son needs you," he said finally. "And he turned to face her. "When you sing to him, when you hold him, when you walk into a room and his whole face changes. Kalina, I have not seen my son at peace since the day he was born. Not once. Until you. Jason, I know what I am. I know the world I built. I know you should run as far from me as you possibly can." He moved closer, his voice dropping to something raw and unguarded. "But I'm asking you to stay. Not because of tradition or contracts or obligation. Because He stopped. His jaw worked. And then he said something she was not prepared for. "I'm getting out." Kalina stared at him. "What?" "The syndicate. The operations. All of it. I'm walking away." "You told me no one walks away from this life." "No one has. I'll be the first." "They'll destroy you." "Maybe." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made the room feel small. "But my son asked for a mother on a plane, and the universe sent him you. And I am done building an empire that cost me everyone I love." Kalina's breath shook. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know that the man asking you to stay isn't the same man who sat on that plane. I'm not asking you to join my world. Kalina, I'm asking you to help me leave it." In the crib between them, Seo Jun stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused, half-dreaming, and found Kalina's face. His tiny mouth curved into a sleepy smile. And then he made a sound, soft and breathy and perfect. "Ma." It was a babble, a 3-month-old's random syllable. It meant nothing in the medical literature. But standing in that nursery, looking at this baby who had chosen her from the first moment she held him, and the father who was willing to dismantle his entire world for a chance at something better, it meant everything. Kalina reached into the crib and lifted Seo Jun against her chest. The baby sighed contentedly and closed his eyes. "I'm staying," she said. "Not for a week. Not for a contract." Jae-sun's breath released in a sound she had never heard from before. Relief so profound it sounded almost like pain. "But I need you to understand something." Kalina's voice was steady even as tears slid down her cheeks. "I'm not staying because I'm scared to leave. I'm not staying because I have nowhere to go. I'm staying because I lost my daughter, and I thought I would never feel whole again. And your son," her voice broke, "your son gave me a reason to keep going. So if you're serious about getting out, if you're serious about being the man your son deserves, then I will stand beside you through whatever comes. But you have to mean it, Jae-sun. You have to mean it with everything you are." He crossed the space between them. His hand cupped her face, warm, calloused, trembling with something she had never expected to find in a man like him. "I mean it," he whispered, "with everything I am." He kissed her forehead, soft, reverent, a promise sealed in the quiet nursery, while their son slept between them. And somewhere across the city, Shin Dae-ho was about to learn that destroying Jae-sun Kwon was going to be far harder than he imagined. Because a man with nothing to lose is dangerous, but a man with everything to protect is unstoppable. The battle for Jae-sun's freedom hasn't even started yet, and the Shin clan doesn't know what's coming. If you're already invested in this family, subscribe to Echo True Stories and hit that bell. Share this with someone who believes love is worth fighting for. Chapter 4 is where everything changes. Leaving the Korean syndicate was not a resignation letter. It was not a conversation over coffee or a handshake in a boardroom. It was a negotiation conducted in rooms where the wrong word could end a bloodline, where tradition weighed more than law, and where the concept of freedom was a privilege granted by consensus, not a right. Jae-sun Kwon had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Quietly, methodically, with the patience of a man playing a game no one else knew was being played. Over those 3 years, while running the Kwon family's operations with the same precision that had made him the most respected boss on the West Coast, he had compiled a file, financial records tracing decades of transactions across every major family, recorded conversations captured on devices no one had thought to check, photographs that connected council members to politicians, police chiefs, and foreign accounts, evidence that, if released, could dismantle not just his family, but the entire Korea-American syndicate infrastructure from Los Angeles to New York. It was not a weapon. It was an insurance policy, a guarantee that walking away did not mean walking into a grave. The first meeting was with his cousin, Min-ho. They sat across from each other in a private room at a Korean restaurant in Koreatown, the kind of establishment where the owner knew not to ask questions, and the walls were soundproof for reasons that had nothing to do with acoustics. "You're serious," Min-ho said. He was 33, sharp-eyed, ambitious, in the careful way of a man who had spent his entire life in someone else's shadow. He had wanted leadership of the Kwon family for years. Everyone knew it. Jae-sun had always known it. "I'm serious. The family is yours if you want it. Every territory, every operation, every alliance. And in exchange, I walk away. Clean. No obligations, no future claims, no reprisals. I take my son, and I disappear." Min-ho studied him for a long moment. "This is about the woman. This is about my son. And yes, it's about her. The old families won't like it. Shin Dae-ho is already circling. Dae-ho is a relic clinging to traditions he uses as weapons. Let me handle the council. All I need from you is a yes." Min-ho was quiet for 30 seconds. Then, "Yes." The council meeting took place 2 weeks later in a building that didn't appear on any map, attended by representatives of every major Korean syndicate family on both coasts. 14 men and 3 women sat around a table that had hosted these conversations for over 40 years. Jae-sun stood before them and stated his intention plainly. He was leaving. Min-ho would assume leadership of the Kwon family. The transition would be orderly, the territories maintained, the alliances honored. Nothing would change except the name at the top. For 10 minutes, the room was respectful. Questions were asked and answered. Details were negotiated. Then Shin Dae-ho spoke. "Before we vote," the old man said, rising from his chair with the theatrical gravity of someone who had been rehearsing, "I must address the shame that has brought us here. Jae-sun Kwon has not simply decided to retire. He has allowed an outsider, a non-Korean woman, to occupy a sacred role in his household. He has corrupted our traditions. He has weakened our bloodline. And now he asks us to bless his departure, so he can run off with this. Choose your next word very carefully." Jae-sun's voice cut through the room like a blade. He did not raise it. He did not need to. "I have tolerated your posturing for weeks, Dae-ho. I have tolerated the threats you sent to my home, the photographs, the intimidation campaign against a woman who did nothing but help my child. I tolerated it because I wanted this process to be civilized." He looked around the table. "But if anyone in this room, anyone speaks about the woman I love with disrespect, civility ends." The room went silent. Jae-sun reached into his jacket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This contains a summary of the insurance file I compiled over the past 3 years. Every family in this room is represented. Financial records, recorded conversations, photographic evidence. The complete file is held by 3 separate attorneys in 3 different states with instructions to release everything if I, my son, or Kalina Du Bois are harmed in any way." He let that settle. "I am not threatening anyone. I am simply ensuring that my departure is respected. I have served this organization faithfully for 15 years. I have expanded our territory, increased our revenue, and maintained peace between families who had destroyed each other without mediation. I have earned the right to leave." "And the woman?" Dae-ho's voice had lost its theatrical edge, replaced by something bitter and small. "The sacred bond." "The sacred bond," Jae-sun interrupted, "exists because Kalina Du Bois is the most extraordinary person I have ever met. She nursed my starving son when no one else would. She walked into a world she didn't understand to save a child she had no obligation to help. If that isn't sacred, if compassion and courage and selflessness aren't sacred, then our traditions mean nothing." He looked directly at Dae-ho. "And they mean nothing to you. You've used tradition as a weapon your entire career. You wrapped your prejudice in the language of honor and expected this council to enforce it. But honor isn't about bloodline purity, Dae-ho. Honor is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." The vote was called 30 minutes later. 12 in favor of Jae-sun's clean departure, 2 abstentions, 1 against. Shin Dae-ho, whose objection was noted and dismissed with a kind of bureaucratic indifference that was in its own way, more devastating than any punishment. Daeho had gambled everything on turning the council against Jae-sun. He had leaked photos, sent threats, invoked ancient traditions, and appealed to the ugliest instincts of the old guard. And he had lost, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a vote, quietly, democratically. The council had chosen progress over prejudice, and Daeho walked out of that room diminished in a way that no amount of territory or money could repair. While Jae-sun fought his battle in boardrooms, Kalina fought hers in quieter ways. Hannah became her anchor, the older woman who had navigated 40 years in this world as a mixed heritage outsider, taught Kalina the unwritten rules of survival, which families were allies, which traditions to respect, how to carry herself with the kind of quiet dignity that turned hostility into grudging respect. "You don't have to become Korean," Hannah told her one afternoon as they sat in the garden watching Seo-jun nap in his stroller. "You just have to become yourself so completely that they can't ignore you. Is that what you did?" Hannah smiled. "I was myself so loudly for so long that they eventually stopped trying to make me someone else. Took about 15 years. She paused. "You'll be faster. You have something I didn't." "What's that?" "The boss loves you. Not just protects you, loves you. When these families see a man dismantle his empire for a woman, it changes what they believe is possible. You're not just Kalina Du Bois anymore. You're proof that love is more powerful than legacy." On the day the council vote came through, Jae-sun drove home himself. No security detail. No bodyguards. Just a man in a car. Driving through city streets toward the only people who mattered, he found Kalina and Seo-jun in the living room. They had built a blanket fort using every cushion in the house, and Seo-jun sat in the middle, wearing a crown fashioned from aluminum foil, babbling happily at a stuffed dragon. Kalina wore a matching crown, slightly crooked, and was making the dragon dance, while Seo-jun shrieked with delight. She looked up when Jae-sun appeared in the doorway, and the question in her eyes was the same one she had been carrying for weeks. "It's done," he said. Kalina's breath left her in a rush. "It's done?" They agreed. 12-1. Minho takes over effective immediately. "I'm out." He swallowed. "I'm just Seo-jun's father now." "You were always more than that," she whispered. She crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him. Seo-jun, sensing something important, crawled over and grabbed Jae-sun's pant leg, pulling himself up with a determined grunt. Jae-sun lifted his son with one arm and held Kalina with the other, and for the first time in 15 years, the weight he had been carrying, the weight of empire, of violence, of a legacy built on darkness, lifted from his shoulders. "No more," he said into Kalina's hair. "No more locked rooms. No more phone calls at midnight. No more darkness. Just us." "Just us," Kalina repeated, and meant it with everything she had. He walked away from an empire and walked toward his family. "Drop a comment and tell us. Do you believe people can truly change? Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose love. And if you're not already subscribed to Echo True Stories, what are you waiting for? The finale is going to make you cry." They were married on a Sunday in October, on a clifftop overlooking the Oregon coast. The venue was not a cathedral or a banquet hall. It was a clearing in the forest behind their new home, where Pacific winds carried the sound of waves up through Douglas firs, and the late afternoon light turned everything to gold. Kalina had wanted something small, something real, something that felt like the life they were building rather than the life Jae-sun had left behind. She got exactly that. The ceremony space was simple. Wooden benches arranged in a semicircle, wild lavender and white roses lining a short aisle, and an arch woven from driftwood and Korean silk ribbons. The guest list was 30 people. Kalina's parents, her sister niece, 3 friends from her nursing days, Jae-sun's mother, a tiny woman named Seon, who had wept from the moment she arrived and showed no signs of stopping, Hannah, and a handful of people from their new coastal community who knew Jae-sun as a businessman and father and nothing more. No bodyguards, no security detail, no men with earpieces scanning the perimeter, just friends and family, and an ocean that stretched to infinity. Seo-jun, now 9 months old, served as the ring bearer. This was a ceremonial title at best. since his primary contributions to the event were attempting to eat the rings, crawling off the aisle to investigate a beetle, and babbling ma so loudly during the reading that even the officiant laughed. He was healthy, gloriously, undeniably healthy. Round cheeks, bright eyes, a laugh that sounded like joy distilled into sound. He had been fully transitioned to solid foods and bottles for months now, but the bond he had formed with Kalina on that plane, the bond that ancient traditions called sacred, had only deepened with time. She was his mother in every way that mattered. The paperwork was still in progress, but the reality had been settled long ago in a nursery at 2 a.m. when a baby chose a woman and refused to let go. Kalina walked down the aisle in a dress that made Jay's son forget how to breathe. It was simple, ivory silk with clean lines, a design that somehow incorporated subtle elements of Korean embroidery along the hem, without looking anything other than timeless. Her natural curls were loose, crowned with a simple circle of white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of lavender and Korean chrysanthemums. She walked alone, not because she had no one to give her away, but because she had chosen to give herself, a woman walking toward her future on her own 2 feet, with clear eyes and a full heart. Jay's son stood at the altar in a charcoal suit that fit like it was born on his body, and when he saw her, his carefully maintained composure dissolved entirely. He pressed his fist to his mouth, his eyes glistening, his chest heaving with the effort containing what he felt. His mother, Seon, whispered something in Korean to Hannah, who translated softly for Kalina's parents. She says she has never seen her son cry, not once in 36 years. Until now. The vows were simple. Jay's son spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. I spent my life building things. Empires, walls, fortresses to keep the world out. I thought that was strength. I was wrong. He took Kalina's hands. Strength is a woman on a plane who walks toward a stranger's crying child instead of away. Strength is choosing compassion when the world tells you to protect yourself. Strength is you, Kalina. You walked into my darkness and brought the light with you, and I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it. Kalina's vows were shorter. Her voice trembled but did not break. I lost my daughter, and I thought I would never be whole again. I thought the best parts of me died with Amara, and all that was left was grief wearing a person's shape. She squeezed his hands. But then a baby cried on a plane, and I couldn't look away. And his father had the same broken look in his eyes that I saw in my mirror every morning. And I thought, maybe broken things find each other for a reason. Maybe that's how healing starts. She smiled through tears. You were always worth the risk, Jae-sun. I was just waiting for you to see it too. Then Seo-jun, who had been sitting on Hannah's lap with increasing impatience, launched himself forward with a shriek that could only be interpreted as editorial commentary. Hannah barely caught him before he face-planted into the lavender. I think he wants to say his vows, Jae-sun said. The laughter that followed broke the tension beautifully. Jae-sun scooped up his son. Kalina took the baby's tiny hand, and the 3 of them stood together at the altar while the officiant completed the ceremony. When Jae-sun kissed his wife, Seo-jun grabbed both their faces with his chubby hands and smashed his own open mouth against Kalina's cheek in what could generously be called a kiss. The guests erupted. The reception was held at their home, a stunning structure perched where forest met coastline, all natural wood and floor-to-ceiling glass, traditional Korean screens beside Pacific Northwest stone. Jae-sun had designed it himself, working with an architect who understood that this house needed to honor 2 heritages without diminishing either. Korean paper lanterns hung beside strings of Edison bulbs. The menu blended Korean barbecue with Southern comfort food. Kalina's mother's mac and cheese sat beside Suyun's kimchi jjigae, and both disappeared within the hour. A 3-piece jazz ensemble played standards while guests danced on the deck overlooking the ocean. Kalina's father, a retired postal worker from the south side of Chicago who had spent the first 3 months of his daughter's new relationship in a state of quiet terror, pulled Jae-sun aside during the reception. I'm not going to pretend I understand your past, he said, his handshake firm, his eyes direct. But I understand how my daughter looks now compared to a year ago. A year ago, she was dying from the inside out. Now she's alive again. He paused. You did that. You and that baby. So whatever you were before, What you are now is the man who saved my little girl. And that's enough for me. Jason, who had negotiated with crime lords and stared down threats that would make most men buckle, had to excuse himself to the bathroom to compose himself after that conversation. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, Hannah lingered. She stood in the kitchen helping Sui unpack leftover food. The two women who had initially regarded each other with wary distance now moving in comfortable rhythm, bonded by their shared devotion to the family upstairs. "You did well," Hannah told Kalina as she prepared to leave. "Both of you." "I couldn't have done any of it without you," Kalina said. "The threats, the pressure, the transition, you held everything together." Hannah waved this off. "I've been holding things together for 40 years. It's a habit." She paused at the door. "But Kalina, enjoy this. You've earned it. Both of you have." 2 hours after the last guest left, as Kalina was rocking Seo-jun in the nursery, a car pulled into the driveway. Jae-sun tensed, old reflexes dying hard, but relaxed when he saw who stepped out. Elder Yoon, a dignified man in his 70s who represented the council's longest-serving family, approached the door with a sealed envelope. "Forgive the intrusion on your wedding day," he said, bowing slightly. "The council wanted this delivered personally." Jae-sun opened the envelope. Inside was a formal document bearing the stamps of every major Korean syndicate. Both coasts, 14 families, unanimous. A permanent, unconditional release from all obligations, ties, and claims. No conditions. No expiration. No strings. "You're free," Elder Yoon said, truly and completely. He turned to Kalina, who had appeared in the hallway, with Seo-jun on her hip. "Mrs. Kwan, what you did for this family, nursing a child who was not your own, standing firm when lesser people tried to drive you away, reminded the council why our traditions exist, not to exclude, but to honor those who sacrifice for our children." He bowed to her with a depth of respect that made her breath catch. "You are sacred to us, not because of ancient customs, but because of who you are." After Elder Yoon departed, Jae-sun and Kalina stood on their deck in the darkness, the document still in his hand, the ocean whispering below. "It's really over," Kalina said. "It's really over." Seo-jun, nestled against Kalina's shoulder, made a soft sound in his sleep, the contented sigh of a baby who had never known a single day of insecurity since the woman on the plane answered his cry. "I have something to tell you," Kalina said. Jae-sun looked at her, and she saw his expression shift from peaceful to alert, the reflex of a man who had spent too many years bracing for bad news. "I'm pregnant." The alert dissolved. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For 5 full seconds, the most articulate man Kalina had ever known could not produce a single word. Then he let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, swept her into his arms, carefully mindful of Seo-jun, and spun her around on the deck while the stars watched. "How long?" he managed. 6 weeks. "I wanted to tell you after the wedding." 6 weeks. He set her down, cupped her face in both hands, and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, her lips. "You're giving me another child. We're giving Seo-jun a sibling." She grinned. "He's going to be a terrible big brother. He'll try to eat the baby." Jae-sun laughed. A real laugh, full and free, the laugh of a man who had forgotten what joy sounded like and was remembering all at once. Later, as the house settled into nighttime quiet, Kalina sat in the nursery rocking chair for Seo-jun's last feeding of the day. The baby was mostly on solid foods now, but bedtime still called for a warm bottle and a rocking chair and a lullaby. The Korean lullaby Jae-sun had taught her on a night that felt like a lifetime ago. She sang it now, her pronunciation much improved, the melody flowing from her as naturally as if she had known it her whole life. Seo-jun's eyes grew heavy, his bottle going slack in his tiny hands. Jae-sun leaned in the doorway, watching them. This woman who had walked onto a plane as a stranger and walked off as he answered to every prayer he had been too proud to speak. This woman who had faced down an empire of prejudice and tradition and hatred and come through it with her grace and tact. This woman who was carrying his second child while singing his first child to sleep in a language that was not hers, but had become theirs. Seo-jun's eyes fluttered. He looked up at Kalina, and his face, round and healthy and perfect, curved into the sleepy smile of a baby who knew exactly where he belonged. "Mama," he said, clear, unmistakable, not a babble. The word. Kalina's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her lips to his forehead and held him closer. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm always here." She looked up at Jae-sun and found him crying silently in the doorway. This man who had once commanded an empire, who had made powerful men tremble with a glance, undone by a single word from his son's mouth. "Come here," she said softly. He crossed the room and knelt beside the rocking chair, one hand on Seo-jun's back, the other on Kalina's knee. The three of them, soon to be four, held still in the quiet nursery while the ocean murmured outside and the stars pressed against the windows. "Thank you," Jae-sun whispered. "For what?" "For answering his cry. On that plane, when everyone else looked away, you walked toward us." His voice broke on the last word. "You walked toward us, Kalina, and you saved us." She stroked his hair with her free hand. "You saved me right back." Seo-jun sighed in his sleep, a sound so small and so content that it seemed to hold the entire story inside it. The cry on the plane, the stranger's courage, the dangerous man's surrender, the traditions that tried to keep them apart, and the love that made those traditions meaningless, the grief they had both carried, and the healing they had found in each other, the empire abandoned and the family built in its place. It had started at 30,000 feet with a baby's desperate cry and a woman who couldn't look away. It ended here, in a house where forest met ocean, in a nursery filled with paper cranes and Korean lullabies and the soft breathing of a child who had everything he needed, not because of tradition, not because of bloodlines, not because of power or territory or ancient customs, because a woman walked toward a stranger's child when everyone else walked away, and because love, stubborn, defiant, sacred love, had proven once again that it was stronger than every empire ever built. Kalina Du Bois Kwan rocked her son to sleep, her hand resting on the new life growing inside her, her husband kneeling beside her in the quiet dark. Home was not a place. It was not a culture or a name or a legacy carved in stone. Home was wherever they were together, and they were finally, beautifully, completely home. The end. If this story touched your soul, then you already know you belong here. Subscribe to Echoed True Stories for more powerful stories of love, healing, and second chances that remind you what matters most. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Like this video if you believe love is stronger than fear. Share it with someone who needs to hear that broken things can become beautiful. And comment home if you believe family is a choice, not a bloodline. We love you, we see you, and we'll see you in the next one. "Forgive the intrusion on your wedding day," he said, bowing slightly. "The council wanted this delivered personally." Jae-sun opened the envelope. Inside was a formal document bearing the stamps of every major Korean syndicate, both coasts, 14 families, unanimous, a permanent, unconditional release from all obligations, ties, and claims. No conditions, no expiration, no strings. "You're free," Elder-yoon said, truly and completely. He turned to Kalina, who had appeared in the hallway with Seo-jun on her hip. "Mrs. Kwan, what you did for this family, nursing a child who was not your own, standing firm when lesser people tried to drive you away, reminded the council why our traditions exist, not to exclude, but to honor those who sacrifice for our children." He bowed to her with a depth of respect that made her breath catch. "You are sacred to us, not because of ancient customs, but because of who you are." After Elder-yoon departed, Jae-sun and Kalina stood on their deck in the darkness, the document still in his hand, the ocean whispering below. "It's really over," Kalina said. "It's really over." Seo-jun, nestled against Kalina's shoulder, made a soft sound in his sleep, the contented sigh of a baby who had never known a single day of insecurity since the woman on the plane answered his cry. "I have something to tell you," Kalina said. Jae-sun looked at her, and she saw his expression shift from peaceful to alert, the reflex of a man who had spent too many years bracing for bad news. "I'm pregnant." The alert dissolved. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For 5 full seconds, the most articulate man Kalina had ever known could not produce a single word. Then he let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, swept her into his arms, carefully mindful of Sejun, and spun her around on the deck while the stars watched. "How long?" he managed. 6 weeks. "I wanted to tell you after the wedding." 6 weeks. He set her down, cupped her face in both hands, and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, her lips. "You're giving me another child. We're giving Seo-jun a sibling." She grinned. "He's going to be a terrible big brother. He'll try to eat the baby." Jae-sun laughed. A real laugh, full and free. The laugh of a man who had forgotten what joy sounded like and was remembering all at once. Later, as the house settled into nighttime quiet, Kalina sat in the nursery rocking chair for Seo-jun's last feeding of the day. The baby was mostly on solid foods now, but bedtime still called for a warm bottle and a rocking chair and a lullaby. The Korean lullaby Jae-sun had taught her on a night that felt like a lifetime ago. She sang it now, her pronunciation much improved, the melody flowing from her as naturally as if she had known it her whole life. Seo-jun's eyes grew heavy, his bottle going slack in his tiny hands. Jae-sun leaned in the doorway, watching them. This woman who had walked onto a plane as a stranger and walked off as he answered to every prayer he had been too proud to speak. This woman who had faced down an empire of prejudice and tradition and hatred and come through it with her grace and tact. This woman who was carrying his second child while singing his first child to sleep in a language that was not hers but had become theirs. Seo-jun's eyes fluttered. He looked up at Kalina, and his face, round and healthy and perfect, curved into the sleepy smile of a baby who knew exactly where he belonged. "Mama," he said, clear, unmistakable, not a babble. The word. Kalina's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her lips to his forehead and held him closer. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm always here." She looked up at Jae-sun and found him crying silently in the doorway. This man who had once commanded an empire, who had made powerful men tremble with a glance, undone by a single word from his son's mouth. "Come here," she said softly. He crossed the room and knelt beside the rocking chair, one hand on Seo-jun's back, the other on Kalina's knee. The three of them, soon to be 4, held still in the quiet nursery while the ocean murmured outside and the stars pressed against the windows. "Thank you," Jae-sun whispered. "For what?" "For answering his cry. On that plane, when everyone else looked away, you walked toward us." His voice broke on the last word. "You walked toward us, Kalina, and you saved us." She stroked his hair with her free hand. "You saved me right back." Seo-jun sighed in his sleep, a sound so small and so content that it seemed to hold the entire story inside it. The cry on the plane, the stranger's courage, the dangerous man's surrender, the traditions that tried to keep them apart, and the love that made those traditions meaningless, the grief they had both carried, and the healing they had found in each other, the empire abandoned and the family built in its place. It had started at 30,000 feet with a baby's desperate cry and a woman who couldn't look away. It ended here, in a house where forest met ocean, in a nursery filled with paper cranes and Korean lullabies and the soft breathing of a child who had everything he needed, not because of tradition, not because of bloodlines, not because of power or territory or ancient customs, because a woman walked toward a stranger's child when everyone else walked away. And because love, stubborn, defiant, sacred love, had proven once again that it was stronger than every empire ever built. Kalina Du Bois-Kwan rocked her son to sleep, her hand resting on the new life growing inside her, her husband kneeling beside her in the quiet dark. Home was not a place. It was not a culture or a name or a legacy carved in stone. Home was wherever they were together, and they were finally, beautifully, completely home. The end. If this story touched your soul, then you already know you belong here. Subscribe to Echoed True Stories for more powerful stories of love, healing, and second chances that remind you what matters most. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Like this video if you believe love is stronger than fear. Share it with someone who needs to hear that broken things can become beautiful. And comment home if you believe family is a choice, not a bloodline. We love you, we see you, and we'll see you in the next one.